The summer sun was a relentless fireball over Cypress Creek, Missouri, turning the asphalt streets into a shimmering black griddle. The heat wave was in its third merciless week, an unforgiving siege that drove the locals to seek refuge in the shade of ancient oak trees and the few precious air-conditioned rooms, a true luxury in this western part of town. At the bus stop, a lonely outpost of sun-bleached concrete and peeling paint, Kimani Kim Stafford stood, battered by the hot wind. She used road, waiting for the bus from the Boonville Correctional Center. Today was supposed to be a new beginning. Her husband, Randall Stafford, was coming home after 2 years for armed robbery, a single stupid mistake that had cost them everything. 2 years, 730 days, 17,720 hours. Kimani had counted every moment, each day a struggle against despair, each night a vast ocean of loneliness. She nervously fiddled with the hem of the summer dress she'd bought, specifically for this occasion. A bright sunflower print, a defiant symbol of hope against the backdrop of their decaying neighborhood. 24 months of waiting, 24 months of solitude in their small apartment on the outskirts of town, where the walls seemed to shrink with each passing day. Today, everything had to change. She had promised herself it would. When the dusty bus finally appeared in the distance, a hazy silver dot under the sun, Kimani's heart hammered against her ribs. She quickly smoothed her hair, a futile attempt to look perfect as the humid air mercilessly waged war on her style. Randall Stafford was stepping off a prison bus, a free man after 730 days. But the air of freedom was thick with the scent of danger, and the embrace of the wife who had waited for him felt terrifyingly strange. A cold tendril of anxiety snaked its way into her excitement. Was he still the man she'd said goodbye to through a thick pane of glass, the one who had smiled at her and promised everything would be okay? Or had prison carved out a part of him, leaving a void that could never be filled? The bus hissed to a stop, its doors sighing open, spewing a wave of hot air and the smell of diesel. Men began to disembark, mostly silent and weary, clutching small bags. They moved like wild animals released back into an unfamiliar environment, their eyes guarded, scanning everything with a predator's caution. Kimani held her breath, her eyes darting from face to face. One by one, they stepped down, their expressions grim, but none of them were Randall. Her heart began to sink, a cold panic rising in her chest. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe he wasn't on this bus. Randall was one of the last to get off. He was thinner than she remembered, the lean muscle from his younger days replaced by a wiry tension. New lines were etched at the corners of his eyes, and his shoulders were slumped, not with fatigue, but with a heavy, invisible weight. His gaze held a hollowness, a guardedness that wasn't there before. But it was him, the husband she had waited for all this time. Kimani rushed to him, throwing her arms around him, holding on so tightly it was as if she feared he would dissolve into the heat. "You're home," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She felt his arms tentatively hug her back. That hesitation, however brief, was a physical shock, a chill that cut through the oppressive heat. "You're finally home?" Randall smiled weakly, a ghost of his old grin. His eyes wandered over the neighborhood as if it were a foreign country. "Yeah, I am," he said, his voice hoarse as if from disuse. He looked into her eyes, and for a second she saw a complete stranger. He hadn't just come from prison. He had brought a piece of it back with him, a shadow she couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of her being. As they walked to catch the connecting bus home, the silence between them was a physical presence, a void that happy memories couldn't seem to fill. Kimani tried to bridge the gap with stories about the neighbors, about her job at the diner, but Randall just nodded, lost in his own world. She knew he needed time, but a dreadful feeling began to sprout in her heart. Maybe the 24-month gap wasn't just time, but an uncrossable chasm. 2 bus transfers under the hellish sun did nothing for conversation. Kimani could feel that Randall's silence wasn't just fatigue. It had a texture, a weight, like an invisible third passenger sitting between them, suffocating them both. Every time the bus passed a familiar street corner, a landmark from their shared past, she would glance at him, hoping to see a spark of recognition, a hint of nostalgia, but his gaze remained distant, as if he were looking through the buildings, through the memories, to a place she couldn't follow. Their apartment on the third floor of an old brick building greeted them with a wall of stuffiness. The hallway smelled of mildew and cheap pine-scented disinfectant, a scent that only seemed to highlight the grime. Inside, the apartment was small, but Kimani had poured her soul into keeping it clean and cozy. Still, the suffocating summer heat had infiltrated every corner, making the air thick and hard to breathe. Kimani immediately rushed to open all the windows and turned on the single fan they could afford. The blade spun wearily, only stirring the hot, stagnant air. "I made your favorite ribs with barbecue sauce," she said, her voice artificially cheerful, a desperate attempt to break the tension. "And I bought beer, the Blue Moon you always liked." She hoped these familiar comforts would act as a bridge back to him, back to them. Randall walked slowly through the apartment, touching things as if to confirm they were real. He ran his hand over the worn fabric of the armchair, the cheap laminate of the coffee table, objects that had witnessed their life before it was violently split in two. His journey ended in front of their wedding picture, the only one they could afford, taken by a cut-rate photographer in a city park. In the photo, they were young, radiant, and full of a naive hope that now seemed almost cruel. Looking at it, Randall felt like he was observing the lives of two strangers. In the familiar kitchen, Randall stared at their wedding photo and said something that sent a chill down Kimani's spine. "It's different in here." But he wasn't talking about the furniture. Kimani's heart clenched. I rearranged the furniture a little," she explained hastily, her words tumbling out. "And I had to buy a new couch when the old one fell apart. But everything else is the same." But they both knew it wasn't about the furniture. They were the ones who had changed. Randall, who had spent 2 years behind bars, learning to navigate a shrunken world of brutal rules and constant vigilance, where trust was a liability. And Kimani, forced to survive on her own, shouldering every financial and emotional burden, had grown stronger, more resilient, but also more weary. That change hung in the air between them, invisible but as solid as a wall. The evening passed in clumsy attempts to get back on track. They ate the ribs Kimani had slaved over all day, drank the beer, and talked about nothing of consequence. But behind every word, every forced smile, every polite gesture, there was a vast, silent gulf. 24 months of separation couldn't be bridged in a single evening. When night fell, the distance became even more pronounced. Lying in bed, they were like two strangers who had been forced to share a room. Randall lay on his back, stiff as a board, staring at the water-stained ceiling. Kimani lay on her side, her back to him, afraid to touch him, terrified of his reaction. She could feel the invisible barrier between them, cold and impenetrable. "I missed you every day," she whispered into the darkness, the words almost catching in her throat. Randall turned toward her. In the dim, sickly yellow streetlight, filtering through the thin curtains, she saw the raw pain in his eyes. It wasn't anger, but a deep, profound sadness, a soul weariness that seemed to have aged him a decade. "Me too," he replied, and for the first time all day he truly embraced her. His arms were firm, but there was still something hesitant, something practiced in the gesture, as if he were trying to remember a long-forgotten motion. In that moment, Kimani realized that bringing Randall home was just the first step. The real journey, mending what was irrevocably broken, had only just begun, and the road ahead was long, dark, and treacherous. The following days were a torturous series of attempts by Randall to adjust to freedom, a concept he'd dreamed of for 2 years, but now found terrifying and overwhelming. He flinched at the sudden slam of a car door, woke up in a cold sweat from nightmares he couldn't remember, and felt a rising panic in the open spaces of the grocery store. Prison had rewired his reflexes, turning the world outside into a landscape of potential threats. Kimani tried to be patient, telling herself he needed time, but there was something else, an undercurrent of unease she couldn't quite name. Sometimes she would catch Randall watching her with a strange, calculating look, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he found in her face. And every time her phone rang, a nervous habit made her step out onto the tiny, rusted balcony to talk, explaining that she didn't want to disturb him. Randall never asked who was calling, but his silence was louder than any question, and suspicion, like a toxic mold, began to slowly creep into the corners of his heart. On the 5th day after Randall's return, Kwame Price, his best friend since they were kids, came to visit. Kwame was the only one, besides Kimani, who had regularly made the long drive to visit Randall in prison. He was Randall's last link to the outside world, to the man he used to be. "My man!" Kwame boomed, pulling Randall into a bone-crushing hug. "God damn, it's good to see you free." Tall and stout, with a wide, infectious smile and a personality that filled the small room, Kwame brought an air of celebration with him. He came bearing gifts, a six-pack of beer, a bag of greasy potato chips, and an endless stream of stories about what had happened in the neighborhood over the past 2 years. "You won't believe it," Kwame said, cracking open his third beer. "Old man Jackson finally sold his store. Now it's some fancy-ass coffee shop for the white folks who've started moving into the east side. They say it won't be long before this whole part of Cypress Creek is full of their expensive condos and yoga studios." Kwame's words were laced with a familiar bitterness, the resentment of longtime residents watching their neighborhood get gentrified, priced out, and erased. Randall listened, trying to absorb the changes that had rendered his home unfamiliar. As Randall's best friend Kwame walked in, the celebratory mood he brought with him felt strangely coated. Randall noticed his wife and his friend avoiding each other's eyes, a silent, awkward dance that set his teeth on edge, and a small, toxic seed of doubt began to sprout in his mind. Kimani was bustling around, grabbing glasses and a bowl for the chips, but Randall saw it, the way she avoided Kwame's direct gaze. And Kwame, just as deliberately, kept his eyes off her. There was a palpable awkwardness in the air, a shared awareness of something unsaid that made the small apartment feel even more cramped. "How's work, Kim?" Kwame asked when the conversation about neighborhood news died down, his tone a little too casual. "Same old," Kimani shrugged, her voice tired. "Same rude customers, same small tips." "Kimani's working double shifts now," Randall interjected, his voice flat but with an underlying sharpness that made Kwame glance at him. "Gets home after midnight." "We needed the money," Kimani replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. "The rent went up $50 last year." Randall nodded slowly, taking a long swallow of his beer. Something in Kimani's tone, in her rapid-fire explanation, put him on edge. Or was he just paranoid? 2 years in prison had taught him to be suspicious of everyone and everything, to look for the angle, the lie. When Kwame finally left, promising to talk to his cousin about a job for Randall, Kimani started clearing away the empty bottles and crumpled chip bag. "Did Kwame come by a lot while I was away?" Randall asked, his voice carefully neutral, but the question was a probe, a test. Kimani froze for a fraction of a second, her back to him. Then she resumed her cleaning. "Sometimes. He'd bring groceries when I was completely out of money, help me fix the faucet in the bathroom when it broke." She paused, then added, her voice a little too bright. "He's a good friend." "A good friend," Randall repeated, the words sounding hollow and foreign in his mouth. He said nothing more, but a strange cold unease settled in his gut. That night, lying in bed, he watched Kimani's sleeping form, her breathing even and deep, and for the first time, he allowed the ugly question to fully form in his mind. What had the woman lying next to him, the woman who had sworn to wait for him, really been doing during those 24 long, lonely months? The tense atmosphere from Kwame's visit lingered in the apartment like a foul odor. Randall retreated further into a brooding silence, a fortress of suspicion from which he watched Kimani's every move, her attempts to maintain normalcy, her bright chatter, her questions about his day, now felt like a performance, making the pretense of their reunion all the more transparent and painful. The next day, Rhea Johnson, Kimani's older sister, came to visit. Unlike the forced bonhomie of the reunion with Kwame, the meeting with Rhea was charged with an overt hostility from the moment she stepped through the door. Rhea was a practical, sharp-witted woman who worked as a paralegal downtown. She carried herself with an air of superiority and had always felt her younger sister was too naive, too soft-hearted, and had irrevocably chosen the wrong man. She had never bothered to hide her disdain for Randall, even before he went to prison. Kimani's sister, Rhea, looked Randall dead in the eye, her gaze as sharp and cold as shattered glass, and said, "I hope you're not going to drag my sister into trouble again." It wasn't a warning, it was an accusation, delivered with the weight of a final judgment. "So, you're back," Rhea said, her voice devoid of any warmth. She didn't offer a hug or even a handshake, just let her cold eyes rake Randall from head to toe. "Rhea, please!" Kamani tried to intervene, her face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. But Rhea ignored her, her focus locked on Randall. "Do you have any idea what she went through while you were sitting in there, living off the state?" Rhea continued, her voice rising with a righteous indignation. "Working herself to exhaustion, 2 jobs, counting every single penny, denying herself everything just to keep this damn apartment for you. So, you'd have a place to come back to." "I didn't ask her to wait for me," Randall said quietly, his voice dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his eyes. "That was her choice." "Choice?" Rhea snorted, a sound of pure contempt. "She's just too kind and naive for her own good. Always has been. She sees good in people where there isn't any." Her eyes flickered with a meaning that Randall couldn't quite decipher, but it felt like an arrow aimed straight at his heart. The conversation never improved. Rhea only stayed for dinner at Kimani's tearful insistence, but the atmosphere at the table was so cold it could have frosted glass. Every question from Rhea was a cross-examination, every glance a judgment. When she finally left, Randall let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension leaving his body in a rush. "She's always hated me," he said, helping Kimani clear the plates, his hands still trembling slightly with suppressed rage. "Even before I went to prison." "She's just worried about me," Kimani sighed, though her words lacked conviction. "You know how she is, ever since our parents died. She feels responsible." "No, that's not it," Randall said, stopping to look at her directly. "She doesn't think I'm worthy of you." "It's not that, she just—" Kimani stopped, her gaze falling to the soapy water in the sink, unable to finish her sentence. "Just what, Kimani? Just wants you to leave me for someone better? Someone with a clean record and a corner office?" "She just wants me to be okay," Kimani said finally, her voice barely a whisper. But there was a deep uncertainty in her voice, a flicker of something she wasn't saying. The confrontation with Rhea had left a bitter aftertaste, and for Randall, it had solidified a terrifying thought. The world he returned to wasn't just changed, it was filled with people actively waiting for him to fail. And the worst part was, he was starting to wonder if they were right. He looked at Kimani, her back to him as she scrubbed a plate with far more force than necessary, and a new, more pointed question took shape in his mind. Did Rhea know something he didn't? Was her fierce protectiveness just sisterly love? Or was she the keeper of a secret? A full week had passed since Randall's return. The fragile optimism of that first day had completely disintegrated, replaced by the gritty, bitter taste of frustration. Randall was confronting the harsh, unforgiving reality of being an ex-con looking for work. Every slammed door, every polite but firm rejection chipped away at his resolve. "We'll keep your application on file" became the new "we'll call you," a death knell for his hopes. After a week of this demoralizing routine, he began to lose the little hope he had left. He felt a familiar, suffocating sense of uselessness, of being a weight on his wife, who was visibly wilting under the strain of her double shifts. "Maybe we should try another neighborhood," Kimani suggested one evening, her voice gentle as she noticed the despair etched on his face. "Somewhere nobody knows you." "And how do you picture that?" Randall snapped, the dam of his frustration finally breaking. "You think they don't do background checks in the next town over? I'd still have to check the box, Kimani. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? That's going to be a problem everywhere." Kimani flinched and fell silent. The raw pain in his voice was a physical blow. Randall immediately regretted his sharpness. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softer as he reached for her hand. I feel useless. You're working your ass off and I can't even get the simplest job." "It'll get better," Kimani tried to reassure him, squeezing his hand. "Kwame said there might be a spot at his cousin's auto shop. They're not too picky about backgrounds." "Kwame," Randall muttered, and the name was like a lit match to a puddle of gasoline. "All I ever hear from you is Kwame this, Kwame that," Randall yelled, his voice cracking with a week's worth of pent-up rage and suspicion. "What is it with you and him?" In that moment, all the doubt and insecurity that had been festering inside him erupted, and the small room seemed to tremble with the force of his accusation. Kimani snatched her hand back as if burned, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "He helped me when no one else would, when you couldn't, and now he's trying to help you. What is wrong with you?" "With me?" Randall's voice rose, now out of his control. "What's wrong with you? You think I'm blind? You think I don't see you tense up every time your phone rings? The way you sneak out onto the balcony to talk? The way you act so damn weird whenever Kwame is around?" Kimani's face went chalk white, and her hands began to tremble. "Are you accusing me of something?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "I just want to know the truth. What happened while I was away?" "Nothing!" Kimani shrieked, jumping up from her chair so fast it scraped loudly against the linoleum. "I worked my ass off to pay for this apartment, to keep a roof over our heads, so you'd have a place to come back to. I waited 2 years for you, Randall. 2 years. Then why do you act like you have secrets?" Randall stood up too, his own chair pushed back, their kitchen now a battlefield. "Why is it that every time I ask about your work, about your friends, you change the subject or look away?" "Because I'm tired!" Kimani screamed, the sound raw and broken, tears finally streaming down her exhausted face. "I'm tired of all of it, of having to prove my loyalty to you every single day, of your suspicions, of the fact that you're back, but it's like you're still not here." They stared at each other across the small kitchen table, a chasm of mistrust and misunderstanding between them that felt miles wide. The air was thick with unspoken accusations and the curdled pain of 2 years of separation. "I'm going to get some air," Randall finally said, his voice flat and dead. He turned and walked to the door. "Randall, please." Kimani took a step toward him, her hand outstretched, but he was already gone, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed in the sudden silence, a final definitive crack in the foundation of their life together. The next morning, Randall was woken by a surprisingly tender kiss. He opened his eyes to see Kimani looking down at him, her own eyes shadowed with regret. "I'm sorry about last night," she said softly. "I've just been so tired, so stressed." Randall pulled her into his arms, the tension of the previous evening melting away in the warmth of her embrace. "No, I'm the one who should be sorry," he said, burying his face in her hair. "I had no right to talk to you like that." "Kwame called for you this morning," Kimani said, pulling away and getting out of bed. "He set up an interview at that auto shop. It's at 10. Randall shot up, looking at the clock on the nightstand. It was almost 9. "Damn it, why didn't you wake me up sooner?" "You were sleeping so soundly," Kimani shrugged. "I didn't want to wake you. Besides, you still have time. I made breakfast." They had a quick, quiet breakfast, the truce between them fragile but holding. Randall changed into his best shirt and left for the interview, a new, tentative hope fluttering in his chest. The auto shop was a 20-minute walk away, and he decided to walk, to clear his head and save money on the bus. The interview went unexpectedly, miraculously well. The owner, Kwame's cousin, was a gruff, no-nonsense man who'd had his own trouble with the law in his youth. He listened to Randall's story, looked him in the eye, and offered him a trial period at minimum wage, with the prospect of growth if he proved himself. Overjoyed, Randall practically floated home, feeling lighter than he had in years. He stopped and bought Kimani's favorite glazed donuts on the way, spending the last of his pocket money. It was a small gesture, but for him, it was a symbol of their new beginning, a promise of better days. He couldn't wait to see her face light up when he told her the news. The door to their apartment was ajar. A dead, unnatural silence hung in the air, a silence so profound it felt like a sound in itself. When Randall stepped inside, he found a scene that would be burned into his memory forever, a waking nightmare made real on their bedroom floor. The open door immediately set every nerve in Randall's body on fire. Kimani never left the door unlocked. This neighborhood wasn't safe. "Kimani," he called out, his voice tight with a sudden sickening dread. "You home?" The silence that answered him was absolute. It made his heart pound against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. A cold dread, slick and oily, began to spread through his chest. He walked through the living room, then into the kitchen. No one. The bedroom door was closed. He reached out, his hand trembling, and slowly pushed it open. What he saw made the world stop. The air left his lungs in a silent scream. Kimani was lying on the floor beside the bed, twisted at an unnatural angle, in a dark, spreading pool of her own blood. Her eyes were open, staring at the ceiling with a vacant, lifeless expression. Deep, brutal marks were visible on her neck, a testament to a violent struggle. No! The sound that ripped from Randall's throat was inhuman, a raw cry of agony and disbelief that shattered the silence. He stumbled forward, falling to his knees beside his wife, his hands hovering over her, trying to find a pulse even though his mind already screamed the horrifying truth. Her body was still warm, but the life, the light, the essence of her had been violently ripped away. Not remembering what he was doing, his mind a vortex of horror, he ran out into the hallway, screaming for help, his voice cracking. A neighbor, an elderly Mrs. Johnson, peeked out of her apartment. Seeing his bloody hands and the raw terror on his face, she shrieked and immediately fumbled for her phone to call the police. The next few hours passed in a surreal, nightmarish blur. Police officers, paramedics, flashing red and blue lights painting the dingy hallway. A barrage of questions he answered mechanically. Their apartment, their home, was transformed into a crime scene, and Randall, the man who had just walked through the door with donuts and a heart full of hope, was now the prime suspect in his wife's murder. The interrogation room at the Cypress Creek Police Department was a sterile, airless box, humming with the oppressive drone of the air conditioner. Detective Jasmine Powell, a tall, slender black woman whose sharp eyes and professional demeanor missed nothing, watched Randall Stafford with a practiced calm. He sat across from her at the scuffed metal table, a man hollowed out by grief. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, and his hands, still faintly stained with the drying blood of his wife, trembled uncontrollably on the table's surface. Detective Powell took a sip of her now cold coffee and opened the folder containing the preliminary report, the crisp sound of the paper loud in the tense silence. In the cold interrogation room, Detective Jasmine Powell looked Randall in the eye and said, "You have to understand what this looks like." In that instant, Randall's world shifted again. He was no longer just a grieving husband. In the eyes of the law, he was an ex-con with a textbook motive. "Now, Mr. Stafford, let's go over this one more time," she said, her voice even, her gaze unwavering. "You say you left your apartment at approximately 9:30 a.m. to go to a job interview at Johnson & Sons Auto Body, correct?" Randall nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall just past her shoulder. "Yeah. Kamani woke me up. Told me Kwame had set it up. I left around 9:45, maybe closer to 10. And your wife was alive and well when you left?" "Of course she was." Randall's voice was raw with a new kind of pain, indignation. "She made me breakfast. We even made up after our fight last night." Jasmine made a note. The neighbors had indeed confirmed they had heard a loud, vicious argument between the couple the day before. "Tell me about the argument," the detective requested, her eyes carefully gauging Randall's reaction. He let out a long, ragged sigh, rubbing his temples as if trying to physically push the memory away. "It was stupid. I've only been out a week. We were both on edge. I couldn't get a job because of my record, and Kamani was working 2 jobs to pay the bills. I felt useless. It was just a domestic dispute." "Or was there something more?" Powell pressed, her tone sharpening slightly. Randall fell silent, his jaw tightening. He was clearly hesitating. The detective waited patiently, letting the silence stretch and work on him. I accused her of hiding something from me," he finally admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "She'd been acting strange ever since I got back, always taking phone calls on the balcony, avoiding certain topics. And then there was Kwame Price." "Your friend?" "Yeah," Randall said, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. "I thought there was something going on between them while I was in prison. I didn't have proof, nothing specific, just a feeling." Jasmine jotted down another note. Jealousy, a classic powerful motive for murder. But something about Randall's demeanor felt off. His grief seemed too profound, too all-consuming to be faked. "Back to this morning," she continued, bringing him back to the timeline. "You went to the interview. What time did you get home?" "Around 11:30. The interview, it went well. They offered me a trial period. I was so happy. I stopped and bought Kimani her favorite glazed donuts." His voice cracked, the memory of that small, hopeful act now an instrument of torture. "And then I got back and I found her." "I found her?" He couldn't finish the sentence, his composure shattering completely as he buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Jasmine gave him a moment. "Mr. Stafford," she said finally, her voice firm but not unkind. "You have to understand what this looks like from our perspective. You were recently released from prison. You had a violent argument with your wife the night before she was killed. You admit you accused her of infidelity." "I didn't kill Kimani!" Randall's head shot up, his palm slamming down on the metal table with a deafening bang. "I loved her. She waited for me for 2 years. Why in God's name would I kill her?" "Maybe you learned something that confirmed your suspicions," Powell suggested coolly. "Maybe Kimani confessed something to you this morning, and you snapped." "No, no, no!" Randall's voice was a desperate, pleading cry. "I was at a job interview. You can ask the owner of the auto shop. Ask Kwame. He's the one who set the whole thing up." Jasmine nodded slowly, closing the folder. "We'll be sure to check your alibi, Mr. Stafford. In the meantime, you'll have to stay here." Leaving the interrogation room, Powell felt a prickle of doubt. The case was too neat, too perfect. Randall's alibi was his only defense, and she intended to scrutinize it until it either held firm or shattered completely. Randall spent a soul-crushing night in a holding cell, the smell of disinfectant and despair clinging to him. The next morning, he was escorted back to Detective Powell's interrogation room. "Your alibi checks out, Mr. Stafford," Jasmine informed him, her expression unreadable. "The owner of the auto shop confirmed you were there from approximately 10 to 11 a.m. Factoring in travel time, you couldn't have physically been at the apartment to kill your wife." A wave of relief so powerful it made him dizzy washed over Randall, but it was short-lived. He saw the cold resolve in the detective's eyes. "But that doesn't mean you're completely off the hook," she continued. "You could have hired someone, or you could have killed her before you left for the interview, and the coroner's time of death is off." "I didn't kill Kimani," Randall yelled, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and grief. "And I don't have money to hire anyone for anything." "And that's what we're trying to find out," Jasmine replied calmly. "For now, we have no legal reason to hold you, but I'm asking you not to leave the city. You are still a person of interest." After Randall was released, Jasmine went straight to the morgue, where the full autopsy report was waiting. Dr. Malik, an older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and kind eyes that had seen too much, met her at the entrance. "Detective Powell," he nodded, "I have some interesting data for you." They went into the sterile, cold autopsy suite. The autopsy report revealed a shocking, brutal detail. Kimani had been struck hard on the head with a heavy, blunt object before being strangled. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a calculated two-step execution. "The cause of death was strangulation," Dr. Malik began, his voice clinical. "The killer used some kind of ligature, a scarf, or a belt. But what's significant is this massive trauma to the occipital bone. The victim was hit hard from behind, likely rendering her unconscious before she was strangled." "The murder weapon?" Jasmine asked. "Not found at the scene, but the wound suggests a heavy object with a smooth, rounded surface. A vase, a statuette, something like that. Time of death is a window, between 9:30 and 11 a.m., but my best estimate puts it closer to 10. Right after her husband left," Jasmine murmured to herself. "One more detail," Dr. Malik added, adjusting his glasses. "The victim showed signs of recent consensual sexual intercourse, within an hour or two of her death." This new information sent Jasmine's mind racing. The couple had reconciled after their fight. Morning sex would be a logical, intimate conclusion. Or had Kimani met someone else right after Randall walked out the door? Back at the Stafford apartment, now a sealed and silent crime scene, Jasmine felt the investigation stalling. There was no murder weapon, no sign of forced entry. The killer had been let in or had a key. Jasmine decided it was time for a different kind of partner. "Carter, call in the K9 unit," she said to her partner over the phone. "I want to see if we can pick up a scent trail leading away from the scene." An hour later, Officer Miller arrived with Shadow, a magnificent, highly trained German shepherd. After being given one of Kimani's scarves to smell, Shadow went to work, his powerful nose to the ground. The dog methodically tracked a scent through the apartment, into the hallway, and down the 3 flights of stairs. He confidently led them out the front door of the building and stopped dead at the curb, whining and barking in frustration. "He's lost the trail," Officer Miller said, patting the dog's neck. "The scent ends right here. Looks like our suspect got into a vehicle and drove off." Jasmine sighed. It was a dead end, but a telling one. It confirmed a planned exit, not a panicked flight on foot. While the K-9 unit packed up, Jasmine decided to do one last, meticulous sweep of the bedroom herself. In a drawer on Kimani's side of the bed, tucked away behind a bottle of shampoo and some old lotions, she found a pack of birth control pills. It was a small detail, but it snagged her attention. Why hide them? Was she afraid Randall would find them and jump to the same conclusion he had already landed on? This small, hidden detail, combined with the K-9's dead-end trail, screamed that this case was far more complex than a simple domestic dispute. There was a deep secret here, and Jasmine was determined to drag it into the light. A deep dive into Kimani's phone records revealed a glaring anomaly. In her call log, one number appeared with a startling frequency, saved simply as K. A quick database search confirmed the number belonged to Kwame Price. The calls were constant, especially during the 2 years Randall was in prison. Some stretched for hours, many occurring late at night, well past midnight. It was long past time to have a serious talk with a good friend. Kwame Price's messy apartment smelled of stale beer and old takeout. When Detective Powell knocked, he took a long time to answer. When he finally opened the door, he was shirtless, looking sleepy and profoundly irritated. "Kwame Price?" Jasmine asked, holding up her badge. "Detective Powell, homicide. I have a few more questions about the Kimani Stafford case." Kwame's face shifted at the mention of Kimani's name, a flicker of something, pain or maybe anxiety, in his eyes. "I already talked to the police," he muttered, running a hand over his face. "I told them everything I know, which is nothing." "I'd still like to ask you a few questions," Jasmine insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "May I come in?" Kwame sighed and reluctantly stepped aside. "How long have you known Kimani and Randall Stafford?" Jasmine began, forgoing the messy couch he gestured to and remaining standing. "Since we were kids," Kwame answered. "Me and Randall, we grew up together on the same block. I've known Kimani since they started dating in high school." "Did you stay in touch with Kimani while Randall was in prison?" Kwame nervously rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, of course. I tried to help her out, you know. She was in a tough spot, all alone." "According to her phone records, you two talked a lot," Jasmine said, watching him closely. "Some of your calls lasted for hours and happened very late at night." "So what?" Hostility flared in Kwame's voice. "We were friends. She was lonely. She needed someone to talk to." "Just friends," the detective clarified, her voice dropping slightly, her gaze sharp as a needle. He tensed, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "What are you trying to say, detective?" "I'm trying to understand the nature of your relationship with the victim, Mr. Price. It's relevant to a homicide investigation." "We didn't have a relationship," Kwame snapped. "I was helping my best friend's wife while he was locked up, that's all." "Where were you between 9:30 and 11 a.m. on the day of the murder?" Kwame paused for a beat too long, his eyes shifting away. "I was here, asleep. I worked the night shift at the warehouse. Got home around 6 a.m. "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I live alone." His alibi was a black hole, just as Randall's had been before his boss confirmed it. "You called to arrange an interview for Randall, correct?" "Yeah," Kwame nodded. "I called him the night before, and then again in the morning to make sure his ass didn't oversleep." "Did you speak with Randall or Kimani that morning?" Detective Powell asked. Kwame's hesitation lasted only a second, a tiny crack in his facade, but in that brief silence, a crucial lie was born. Kwame hesitated again, just for a fraction of a second. "Kimani, Randall was still asleep." "What time was that?" "I don't remember exactly. Around 9, maybe." Jasmine made a mental note. If Kwame spoke to Kimani around 9 a.m., it was less than an hour before she was likely killed. "Anything unusual about her voice or behavior?" "No," Kwame answered quickly, too quickly. Everything was normal. Jasmine decided to change tactics, to circle from another direction. "When was the last time you saw Kimani in person?" "A couple days ago, before it happened. I went over to their place, brought some beer, wanted to congratulate Randall on being home." "And Kimani? How did she behave during your visit?" Kwame looked away, focusing on a stain on his carpet. "Normal. You know, played the hostess, served snacks, chimed in here and there." Jasmine knew he was lying. His body language screamed it, but without concrete proof, she couldn't press harder. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Price," she said, heading for the exit. "If you think of anything important, you have my card." She was certain Kwame was hiding something significant. But was he a killer? For that, she needed irrefutable evidence. Jasmine's next stop was Rhea Johnson, Kimani's sister. Her neatly decorated house in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac was a universe away from the grit and despair of the Stafford's neighborhood. But Jasmine knew that dark secrets could fester just as easily behind manicured lawns as they could behind peeling paint. "You again, detective?" Rhea asked, her tone a mixture of irritation and anxiety. "I have new information," Jasmine said simply. "May I come in?" Once they were seated in the immaculate living room, Jasmine went straight for the jugular. "Ms. Johnson, I have reason to believe your sister was having an affair with Kwame Price. I found evidence." Rhea flinched as if struck, her carefully composed expression crumbling for a moment before she regained control. She said nothing. "You knew about it, didn't you?" Jasmine continued, her voice soft but persistent. "In our last conversation, you hinted at it, but you didn't say it directly. Why?" Rhea took a long, shuddering breath, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes, I knew," she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Kimani never told me in so many words, but I saw them together. I saw the way he looked at her, the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. It was obvious." "When did this relationship start?" "About 6 months after Randall went to prison," Rhea answered, staring at her hands in her lap. "Kwame was always there, taking care of her, helping her out with money and repairs. I guess one thing just led to another. She was so damn lonely. Why didn't you tell me this before? It's critical to the investigation." Rhea looked away towards a picture of her and Kimani as children on the mantelpiece. "I didn't want to tarnish my sister's memory. She wasn't a bad person, detective. She made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But her heart was good." "Did Randall know?" "I don't think so. Not until you started asking questions anyway. But he must have suspected something. Men aren't stupid. They sense these things." "What happened when Randall got back?" "Kimani decided to end it. She wanted to give her marriage another chance," Rhea said, a fresh wave of bitterness in her voice. "She told Kwame it was over. He did not take it well." "Didn't take it well?" Jasmine interjected, leaning forward. "What does that mean exactly?" "He was furious," Rhea explained, her voice dropping. "He started calling her constantly, in the middle of the night. He threatened to tell Randall everything. Kimani was terrified he might do something crazy. Do you think he could have killed her?" Rhea was silent for a long, heavy moment before answering, her eyes filled with a terrible certainty. "I don't know for sure. But if you're asking me if he had a motive, yes, he did. He wasn't just fooling around, detective. He loved Kimani, and when she chose Randall over him, it might have completely broken him." This was the missing piece. Jasmine thanked Rhea and left, but instead of returning to the station, she drove back to the Stafford apartment, a new theory taking shape in her mind. Rhea's story about Kimani's fear had planted an idea in her head. Maybe Kimani had hidden more than just birth control pills. Hidden in the false bottom of an old, cheap jewelry box, Detective Powell found a stack of handwritten letters tied with a faded ribbon. As she read the desperate, pleading words, a 2-year-old secret was violently exposed, and the identity of the last man to be with Kimani became horrifyingly, sickeningly clear. Back in the crime scene taped bedroom, Jasmine began a new, more focused search. Her eyes landed on the old jewelry box on Kimani's dresser. She opened it. Inside were the usual cheap trinkets. But when she lifted the velvet tray, she felt it. A slight unevenness in the cardboard bottom. Using her pocket knife, she carefully pried it open. Tucked inside was a small bundle of folded papers. They were love letters. The last letter, the paper still crisp, was dated just a week before the murder. It sent a chill down Jasmine's spine. "Kim, I can't do this anymore. You said it was over, that now that R is back, you want to try to save your marriage. I get it, but I can't accept it. We were together for almost 2 years, Kim. You can't just erase that, throw it away, and go back to him like nothing happened. We need to talk. I'll meet you at our spot tomorrow. I have to see you. Always yours, Kay." Jasmine stared at the letters, the evidence heavy in her hands. This was it, the proof she needed. Kwame Price wasn't just a jilted lover, he was an obsessed stalker. And now she had proof of their affair, a clear motive for murder, and a timeline that was snapping into terrifying focus. It was time to confront Kwame Price one last time. It was the same cold, sterile interrogation room, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Jasmine Powell held all the cards. Kwame Price tried to project an air of defiant boredom, but the frantic, hunted look in his eyes gave him away. "Mr. Price," Jasmine began, her voice low and even, "thank you for coming in again. We have some new evidence to discuss." "I've already told you everything," Kwame muttered, slumping in his chair. Jasmine silently took out the bundle of letters and placed them on the table between them. Kwame's face went ashen when he saw the familiar faded ribbon, the familiar handwriting. "Where did you get those?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "In the Stafford apartment," Jasmine replied, her eyes never leaving his face. "In Kamani's jewelry box. She kept all your letters, Mr. Price. All the evidence of your nearly 2-year affair." Kwame closed his eyes, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "That was a long time ago," he finally said, his voice weak. "It had nothing to do with her murder." "I think it does," Jasmine countered. "Judging from this last letter, Kamani decided to end your relationship after Randall returned. You were furious. You couldn't accept it. You threatened her." "That's not true!" Kwame exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "Where were you on the morning of the murder, Mr. Price?" Jasmine asked again. "And this time, I want the truth." Kwame fell silent, his eyes darting around the small room as if searching for an escape route that wasn't there. Jasmine decided to play her final, devastating card. "We found your DNA on Kimani's clothes, near the ligature marks on her neck," Detective Powell said, a calculated clinical lie. Kwame Price's face went white, his tough guy facade dissolving into pure terror. His wall of denial began to crumble. It wasn't entirely true. They only had unidentifiable microtraces, but Kwame didn't know that. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his face now slick with sweat. "We can take a sample of your DNA for comparison right now," Jasmine suggested calmly. "A simple mouth swab. If you're as innocent as you claim, it will only confirm your story and clear your name." Kwame swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I think I want a lawyer," he finally said, the words a clear admission of guilt. "Of course," Jasmine nodded. "That's your right. But before we finish, I want to show you one more thing." She pulled out a photograph of a heavy glass souvenir, a statuette in the shape of a small globe on a stand. "Do you recognize this? A piece just like this, a gift you gave her, was reported missing from the apartment. We found one just like it in a dumpster behind your building. It had traces of Kamani's blood and your fingerprints all over it. It was a complete bluff, a shot in the dark based on Dr. Malik's report, but it hit its mark." Kwame stared at the photograph in abject horror, his hands beginning to shake violently. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice cracking. I cleaned it. I mean, it's not what you think." "What happened that morning, Kwame?" Jasmine asked softly, her voice now gentle, coaxing. "Tell me." And like a dam breaking under immense pressure, Kwame began to talk, the words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and self-loathing. "I didn't mean to kill her," he sobbed, tears streaming down his face, his body shaking. "I loved Kimani. We were together for almost 2 years. I was there for her. And then he came back, and she just threw me away like I was nothing." "You went to see her that morning," Jasmine prompted gently. "Yes," Kwame nodded, his head in his hands. "I knew Randall would be at the interview. I set it up myself. I just wanted to talk to her alone, to convince her that we should be together, that I could give her a better life. What happened? She wouldn't listen to me." Kwame shook his head, his voice broken. "She said it was over, for good, that she loved Randall and always had, that what we had was just a mistake born of loneliness. I just snapped. I couldn't take it. I grabbed that damn statue off the coffee table and..." He stopped, shuddering with violent sobs. "You hit her," Jasmine finished for him, her voice flat. "I didn't mean to," Kwame yelled, his voice a raw cry of anguish. It was just a moment of rage. I wasn't in control, and then she fell, and there was blood. So much blood. I panicked. And you strangled her, Jasmine stated, to make sure she was dead. Kwame nodded, his face contorted with a grotesque mask of grief and remorse. I don't know why I did it. I loved her so much. I couldn't accept that she chose him after everything we'd been through. As Kwame was led away in handcuffs, his sobs echoing in the hallway, Jasmine felt a strange mixture of professional satisfaction and profound sadness. The case was solved, but at what a terrible cost. 3 lives, intertwined and now irrevocably ruined, all because of a toxic cocktail of love, jealousy, and a single moment of unrestrained rage. Jasmine found Randall sitting on the porch of his relative's house, a solitary figure staring into the twilight. When she told him that Kwame had confessed, Randall didn't seem surprised. He just nodded wearily, his eyes empty, holding a pain so deep it seemed to have no bottom. Deceit, Randall said quietly, his voice raspy. It's like a poison. It doesn't just kill love. It kills everything and everyone around it. If she had just been honest with me from the start, maybe things would have been different. Maybe we could have figured it out. Or maybe not. But she'd still be alive. As Jasmine drove away, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky over Cypress Creek in shades of bruised purple and blood red. The oppressive heat of the day was finally beginning to subside, but for Randall Stafford, alone with his thoughts of betrayal and loss, a permanent cold had already settled deep into his heart. This tragedy was a bitter, brutal reminder that the secrets we keep, born from fear and shame, have the power to destroy not only ourselves, but also the people we love. The truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a lie that eats away from the inside, because eventually, deceit will always find its way into the light, often in the most violent and heartbreaking way possible.